A warm welcome to everyone for our PCQuest 35 years journey from 1987 to 2022. Today, we will be discussing India's dot-com revolution, and we have the man who was bang at the center of it all in the form of Rajesh Jain, founder of Netcore Cloud. Welcome, Rajesh.
Hi, Sunil. Pleasure to be on the show.
Yeah. So I'll just get straight to it. Can you describe the early days of the internet in India? And at that time, dot-com was almost a magical world. Everyone wanted to launch a dot-com and everyone thought it was the next big thing. I remember I had just started working in 96 and there was such a buzz about it. I'm sure most of the people today don't know about it. So if you could just take us back to that time.
Sure. So I started IndiaWorld, which were India's first internet portals in March of 1995, which was even before the point of time when commercial internet was available in India, which happened in August 1995. So I started IndiaWorld focused on as a as a portal basically focused on Indians primarily outside of India. So NRIs. It came from my stay in the US, and I realized all the challenges which were there for people to get information about India. So at that time, in fact, when we had to upload, say we had a server in the US, we used to make international calls to upload our data over ISD lines at, I think it was almost 100 rupees a minute. Calls, sometimes the quality was not good. So even if you had to update a small amount of data to update the news and stock quotes, and we had, of course, DataQuest and PCQuest also on our platform at that time on IndiaWorld, it would take an extraordinarily long time. In the first 5-6 months, before VSNL launched dial-up services in India, where you could essentially connect to a local server and then get connected to the internet. So that was a big boon for us. But the early days, I remember when we had gone and spoken to one of India's leading media organizations to tell them why they should have a website on the internet, why it would allow them to reach out to Indians globally. And the first question I got was, is this a new TV channel? Because it was new. I mean, no one knew about it. So I started doing webinars, not webinars, but seminars, physical events. We did one, I think, in August of 1995, how to make money on the internet. So I figured, at least if not the second part, at least the first part would attract people. So it was very exciting times because I had the sense that this would be big. And that was a big deal for me because I was coming out of almost 3 years of having failed at every venture that I tried. And the internet really had that promise that this was something new. This was a great bridge. And in my original business plan, which I had written, I called it an electronic information marketplace. And if you think back, probably, how many ever years later, now 27 years later, it's probably turned out to be that and a lot more.
That's quite fascinating. I mean, it must have been tough. So, I mean, you talked of IndiaWorld Communications. So I'd like to know more about that. What was the role of IndiaWorld Communications in bringing about these booms? And I'm sure, like you mentioned, the cost problem, dial-up problems. What were the problems dot-coms of the early era made? And maybe what were the early dot-coms like? What were their focus areas?
So when I launched in March 95, we had, of course, IndiaWorld. Shortly after that, we realized that basically we had a subscription service at that time, basically $100, I think it was $50 or $60 a year. But I had to bring down the price quite rapidly. Eventually, I made it 20 after 3 or 4 weeks because we got feedback from Indians saying that it was too much. Then I gave it up after about a year and a half or so because I realized that there was account sharing going on. When I realized that in all of GE, I had one subscriber. One person had subscribed and shared the link, email, and password to everyone. We didn't have cookies or anything to track. I said that model is not going to work. So we realized that, if I had to create an alternate model to generate revenue, I mean, there were no ads at that time. That was very early days. And so essentially we decided to do website development as the way to start getting Indian companies saying that, look, if you want to reach out to global audiences, this is a great way to reach out to people and so on. And the first two websites that we launched were O&M, the ad agency at that time, and Boyden. Boyden was a recruitment firm, executive search firm. So both two individuals there, Sridhar and Dinesh Mirchandani. I still remember the names because you never forget the people who gave you your first paychecks. They put faith in me, and then we had to figure out how to price it. So we said, okay, 5,000 rupees a page. So we did 3 pages for both, 15,000 rupees. And that's how the first non sort of portal websites got launched. And then later in the year, we got a very big order from Kotak, and they wanted a full-fledged website. I was on a bus, I think, coming from Nasik or Nagpur when I was basically, I got the news that they had agreed to our proposal. And that was a very big deal for us because that was a sort of vindication of what we were doing. It was very important revenues for us because we had to make ends meet. I had lost most of my money in the failed ventures earlier. So the early days, basically, the websites were primarily targeted at NRIs. So Kotak was really about, getting NRIs to invest in India. Various issues would come up and so on. But the first few sites that we did really set the trend because then I had something to show others saying that, look, this is how you do it. For Kotak, we had also done a full-fledged sort of stock portfolio calculator. If you think about it, these were very big innovations at that time. And then in the 3 to 4 years that the 4 odd years that sort of IndiaWorld ran, we managed about 200 plus corporate websites. Most of the large ones were all either designed and hosted by us or hosted by us. They had design agencies that started coming in. So that was, I think, the early days in that sense, of websites, essentially reaching out to Indians outside India. And then one big attraction, of course, was also NRIs were investing in India. So the new company, the IPOs basically, and the State Bank of India, Resurgent India bonds. We became basically a sub-broker, generated a lot of revenue through there. So I realized that if I just put the form out, I'll get maybe 10,000 rupees. If I become a sub-broker, we made 10 lakhs or something like that from the whole thing. We did the form for free, but we made money as with a sub-broker code would go out. So a lot of such innovations. And then a couple of years later, I created verticals, samachar.com, khel.com, coach.com, bawarchi.com, which really became very popular because I removed the one click. People had to go through the homepage of IndiaWorld. And then the live cricket coverage, people started coming to that Indian search engine. So we borrowed ideas from what was working. The search engine, Yahoo, was very popular at that time. I saw vertical sites doing quite well. So we went a different path than Yahoo. Yahoo was a single URL where everything was under Yahoo. And here we chose to essentially go with Indian names, which made a very big difference. And those are the names that sort of people started remembering. And then the Indian traffic also started going up. You were in office, you want to know the cricket score, khel.com was there. You wanted to search for stuff on India, coach.com, because early days, there was no Google at that time. And the search results would then give you everything all over the world, which you didn't want. So those were the early days. I think very exciting times because there were a lot of new ideas which we could try out, build it out. We were pioneers. And then, of course, many other companies started coming into play. But I think those were, we had a very small team. I mean, we were 20 people managing. I had 13 portals of my own. We had 200 plus corporate websites. And then advertising also started coming in. Mainly the US telecom players started advertising. AT&T and some others were there, essentially selling cards, the telecom cards to NRIs. The US banks started advertising, like Citibank, etc., to NRIs. So the Indian user base was growing very slowly because it was very expensive in the early days. Dial-up services were quite expensive, but the international, the US companies sort of came in And that helped a lot because the combination of some of the advertising kicking in plus the website development helped us become profitable quickly. And that was very important for us.
So you were the pioneers in 95 and you've done so many innovations. You had a great run of 4 years. But then in 1999, India World was picked up by Satyam Infoway for a huge $115 million. I mean, today also $115 is such a huge amount. So I'm just wondering what kind of waves it made at that time. So can you speak a bit about that deal, how it happened and its impact on the industry?
Yeah. So I tried to raise capital through the period that I was running. We had VC interest. In fact, right in the early stages, I put out a press release after I had launched IndiaWorld, and then there was a VC in the US who reached out. And then I had various investor interest over the few years that was there. But for various reasons, I could never get an investment. And in 98, 99, there was a lot of portals being launched. There was investment started happening because internet by .com had become the next big thing globally, and people expected that to happen in India also. And even though I spoke to multiple people, we had a couple of term sheets also, investment never materialized. And then I was wondering what would happen, because without the external investment, it was very difficult for me to hire senior talent, spend money on advertising. None of that was possible. The good news was that because of the core strengths of IndiaWorld, Samachar, Coach, Khel, Bawarchi, these sites, there was a lot of word of mouth spread. We spent almost no money on advertising through these years. I think we ran one Khel.com ad, but otherwise there was almost no advertising there because I didn't have the money. So I could not do promotion. I could not do senior management hiring. I mean, my wife and I were the two people who basically oversaw our 20% team. And then I was wondering what would happen to us, without investment. And then in October of 1999, we got offers from two companies at the same time. So there was a US company, mail.com, which owned India.com. Okay, so they had somehow managed to register the domain India.com, and they wanted to make a big play around that. So they approached us, and SIFI had, Satyam Infoway had later called SIFI, and they had just done an IPO on NASDAQ. I mean, great event in India, the first Indian internet company to IPO, and that too on NASDAQ. And they were primarily an ISP at that time, internet service provider. And they were looking for a content play, almost like AOL. AOL had both. America Online at that time had the dial-up services, plus they had the content side of it. And SIFI had done IPO, and then their stock started rising quite rapidly. So they had the sort of currency for looking at acquisitions. And in basically 2-3 weeks of negotiation, I had DSP Merrill Lynch as my investment bankers. They essentially took the valuation, helped take the valuation from the initial offer of $40 odd million to $115 million. It came to about 499 crores. So all of it happened in essentially 3 weeks. We were a 3 crore revenue company, but we were profitable. And because we were profitable, I could afford to say no in the previous discussions with investors if the valuation would not meet my expectation. So that sort of worked out very well, because I realized that there'll be limits to our growth. And we said we have to be part of something larger. This is very big. By that time, it was quite clear that the internet would be very transformational globally. And I think Ramraj at SIFI, I connected with him, bonded with him very well. He had the same vision, long-term vision to build it out, build out the internet sort of platform services, etc. In India. And that's how the deal happened. It was a largely cash deal. And I think the day, so of course, SIFI paid 115 million for us. But that day, when the deal got announced, November 29th, 1999, their stock rose by $700 million. So That was what the market really was valuing, putting a value on it. And the stock kept rising. In fact, SIFI stock kept rising very rapidly after that. They could do a secondary offering also. But 6 months later, then all the crash started happening. The dot-com crash started happening. But luckily, I think I made the decision to sort of sell at the right time. I think Hemendra Bhai from Merrill Lynch, DSP Merrill Lynch, he, because they were a banker, so he told me something which I remember to this date. He said, more important than knowing when to enter a business is knowing when to exit a business. He said, Rajesh, this is a fantastic deal for you. And you'll have the freedom to do whatever you want in life. Because remember, I mean, I was very sentimentally attached to the business. For 5 years, my wife and I had essentially run it pretty much 24/7 because we were serving audiences all across the world. If a server went down, then I would have to go to VSNL where we were doing the hosting in the middle of the night and get it started. You know, there was no one else who could do it. So we had to do round the clock monitoring. It was a very, I mean, people see the outcome, but they don't see sometimes what an entrepreneur has to go through, you know, to reach the eventual goal. And we never created the business with the idea of selling it. But if, of course, if good offers come, you've got to always be open on that. But it was an amazing journey from the time I got the idea in late 1994 to build out this internet thing, something on the internet, to 1999. I think was an amazing 5-year journey.
So that's quite fascinating, because that is, you exited at exactly the right time. So that is my next question. That is when the bubble was like the biggest, and then the bubble burst. You know, like if you look at, while books have been written about the US scene, you will find so much articles, literature about what happened in the US. There's not that much talk about what happened in India. So when the bubble burst, how was it like in India? What was the India scene in the next few years?
So in India, actually, when I meet a lot of people, sort of older people, of course, remember the deal. It was front page, Economic Times, every paper basically had it on the front page, was one of the largest ones. I mean, very inexplicable. Why would someone pay so much of money for such a small company? That really brought the opportunity of the internet to everyone. And a lot of people whom I've met over the last 25 odd years, they tell me that, look, that deal essentially was a turning point in their lives. They said, we have to be a part of the internet. So some became entrepreneurs, some joined internet companies. So a lot of changes in their life also. But it brought to people, I think most important is that there is something big out here. Okay. Of course, the problem, as it turned out later on, was the fact that we didn't have the audiences in India. Okay, connectivity was still a challenge. The numbers were not there. The promise was there. It took almost, I think, 10 to 15 years after that for the full promise and potential of the internet to get realized, because the connectivity, especially the mobile phone and the 3G and then geos coming in, all really helped explode the internet in the last few years. But in those times, I think it brought to people that, look, this is something really transformational. That there is something big out here, and you didn't have to be part of a large corporate to actually create wealth. A lot of funding had started happening. So a lot of companies were raising funding also. They were running front page ads, if you remember, you know, on front page ads in Times of India and all other papers which were there. So it was bringing home the fact that there is something big out here. And if you see, a lot of companies actually started off at that time, around the 99, 2000 period. I mean, some of the companies like, you know, Sanjeev Picchandani started Naukri.com around the same time in the late 90s, early 2000. And there are a lot of entrepreneurs. IndiaMart, I think, also started around the same time, all built for the internet. That, look, there is something big out here, that there are going to be different challenges which need to get solved. And I remember a Wharton professor, Jitendra Singh, telling me sometime, I think in the early 2000s, he said, Rajesh, when a new technology comes, it's not just the first generation entrepreneurs who make money. The bigger sort of wealth creation and value generation happens from the derivative technologies, derivative solutions. So second generation, third generation. And that's what we have really seen. A lot of Google, Facebook did not exist around the early 2000s. And look at the value they have created over the last 20 odd years. And we are seeing something very similar now with a lot of new technologies. Web3 is being talked about. The whole idea of the decentralized internet, etc., is almost takes me back to that period of what was there in the early 95, where any person could basically imagine something, and you could create a website, either selling something or content, and you didn't have to. You didn't require large amounts of capital. You didn't have to set up a factory, with hundreds of crores. You didn't require bank loans. If you were willing to take a risk, really, the world was there available for you to go out and access. Of course, there were a lot of failures. I think many of them actually stuck on and became second generation, third generation entrepreneurs through the years. Because once you realize what the internet can do, once you're in your venture, that is where you realize that, look, this is a fundamental transformation. This is something which comes once in a generation. And therefore, you don't want to give up. You're at it as an entrepreneur. Failures don't sort of hold you back. And I think that's the sort of people who really helped. The stories from that era, young people who basically were there at that time or read about those stories, really then helped build out future generations of companies.
So actually, that's what I was going to ask you. What has been the legacy of the late 1990s dot-com boom? I think it is very clear what you have talked. Most people there is more talk of Y2K bug and Indian IT services, but I think the foundations were laid in the late 1990s. So to sum it up, it's been 25 years of the internet in India. So how do you sum it up in these 25 years, and what would you like to say to the people of today? Today, what post-pandemic, what a sea change has come. So
absolutely right, Sunil. I think I remember thinking a long time ago that this whole technology cycles come in sort of 12 years, like the Kumbh Mela.
Right.
1971 or thereabouts was the first microprocessor. 1982 was the IBM PC. 12 years later, 1994 was the internet. Another 12 years later came the mobile revolution, the whole mobile phone. And now if you look 2018, 19, 20, thereabouts, it's really this whole decentralized web, the Web3, what we are talking about, the blockchain. So I think what the internet really has done is been the foundation for a lot of new things. You talked of Y2K. So Y2K helped drive, in a way, the services revolution. But now what's happening is two very important things, where you have the SaaS revolution, which is happening, where Indian companies are finally building software products for the globe, for the world. And that couldn't have happened without the ability to have the internet and high-speed connectivity. Second is, for the first time, I think we have the recognition that India itself is a very large market. Okay, so you don't now need to, entrepreneurs don't need to look at Silicon Valley or outside of India to create businesses. Right here, okay, you have at least 40, 50 million, going up to about 100 million Indians with tremendous spending power who want digital services. And I think in the next 5 years, you'll see this number expand dramatically. So a lot of those things have failed. The foundations are in place, with payments, with logistics, with cheap, the world's cheapest internet, digital and high-speed connectivity. All of this really is now empowering entrepreneurs to launch out on their own. And I think this is now an irreversible cycle. What we see in Silicon Valley, and it's not just about successes. Even many of these ventures are going to fail. But the entrepreneurs, basically, once they are there, they are out going to create next generations of companies. There is venture capital available, plenty of capital. And as Indian companies now are able to exit on the IPOs, you have shareholder wealth getting created for employees, for founders, and not just for investors. And that money will again go back into startups, into new founders, and so on. So this cycle, I think, is now kickstarted in India. It's irreversible. So we used to look at China. I remember in the 2005-7, the Chinese internet was growing very rapidly. And I used to keep wondering when that would happen in India. And I think we are there now. I was talking to an entrepreneur just yesterday, and he said, with Web3, and pretty much these were his words, as long as the government regulations don't mess around, we can actually create, it's a level playing field. We can create the world's largest companies sitting in India, because it's just the early days which are there. And you can now target customers or you target users worldwide. I think this is phenomenal. We've always had software skills, but now creating products, creating platforms, I think is a phenomenal opportunity for Indian entrepreneurs going forward. The sort of beginnings were probably 25 years ago with the first era of the internet. But I think now you see the second generation entrepreneurs not worried about failure. Okay, hungry, capital availability is there, exit opportunities are there. And I think it's a $1 trillion opportunity really for India in the next 10 years across SaaS plus the domestic internet. And it's what I call star tech. Everything that is there in tech will become sort of, or everything that is there will become tech powered. So agri-tech, fintech, edu-tech, insure-tech, everything is really now being tech powered. And that's the big promise in India. That's the way we bridge our sort of the gaps which are there in India in education, healthcare, etc. I think it's a great opportunity for Indians. We've got the Indian market now to look at, finally.
So anyway, thank you for that fascinating 25-year journey down the internet in India, and on that, optimistic note. And also, like, I'm intrigued by that 12-year cycle. I'd love to take another interview after 12 years to discuss the next cycle. That would really be fascinating to compare. So it's really been great talking to you. If you have any final words, then we can.
No, I think it's great. And I have to say one thing at the end. I think that PCQuest and DataQuest were among the first magazines on the internet. I think Pradeep Gupta and Sham Malhotra both recognized the power of the internet in the early days. And I think, like you said, PCQuest celebrates 35 years of print, but I think you'll also celebrate 25 plus years of being on the internet.
Absolutely. As we were hosted with you only, you told us. So yes. that's a great journey together. And so thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sunil.